let's get going. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Limerick Writers Centre presentation for Culture Night 2020. Culture Night is brought to you by the Arts Council of Ireland in partnership with local authorities and cultural organisations throughout the island of Ireland. We are delighted to welcome 4 international poets from our poetry imprint, Revival Press. They are John Liddy from Spain, Kieran Armstrong from the UK, Kieran Beville from Ireland, and Eugene Platt from the USA. And I'll tell you something more about them as we go along. Welcome also to our Zoom and Facebook audience, and feel free to leave comments as the reading proceeds. Text comments, by the way, not audio comments. First to say that Culture Night has been a regular feature on the Irish Culture calendar since 2006, and it has always put community at the heart of its activities. Pre-COVID days, this would involve opening cultural facilities and activities free to the public. This year, the vast majority of events will take place online, but it has enabled us to embrace international guests more easily. And tonight we are doing just that with our lineup of poets from Ireland, UK, Spain, and the USA. But not just poets from abroad, but poets who have developed an association with Limerick through being published by our own Revival Press, the poetry imprint of the Limerick Writers Centre. So I'll introduce our guests first in the order that they will read prior to each one reading. I'll give you a brief bio of them. Our first guest tonight is Limerick poet Kieran Beville. He will be followed by Kieran Armstrong from Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK. Then Limerick poet John Liddy living in Spain. And finally from Charleston in the USA, Eugene Platt. That's our lineup. So I'm going to get on with the show and invite our first reader to prepare for his reading while I read out his bio. Kieran Beville is a former teacher of English literature and language. He is the author of Right Now, A Practical Guide to Becoming a Writer, published by the Limerick Writers Centre in 2019. In addition, he has published 14 non-fiction books. He has also had poetry published in Ciphers, Crossways, A New Ulster, Own Stone, Stony Thursday Book, The Sunday Tribune, and Live Encounters. His book, Fool's Goals, was published by Revival Press in 2019. His latest book is a short biography, Pulling Back the Clouds, Mike Kelly, collector and curator of the die-cast model aircraft display at Shannon Airport. Forthcoming from Revival Press is Soul Songs, a collection of poetry. So I'll invite Kieran to get the reading underway.
You're right.
Hello, everybody, and it's a privilege and pleasure to be here. And thanks for everybody who has joined in. And I wish all the readers very well. Thanks for the introduction, Dominic. I'm going to start off with a poem called La Parisienne. And it was inspired by something I read about Balzac, that he once burned the manuscript in a room in Paris in the winter in order to keep warm. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know, but it's something that I read. And I got to thinking about the time I spent in Paris in 1979 on my honeymoon. And when I was there, I bought a book in Shakespeare and Company, a hardback copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And incidentally, the bookshop on the left bank, an independent bookshop, it's still there, I believe, founded around 1919, something like that. But it was owned by a man named Whitman, no relation, I understand, of Walt Whitman. But anyway, I was in an attic room for my honeymoon in 1979 in Hotel Rue Le Goff, and Sigmund Freud stayed there for a time. And it's between Boulevard Saint-Germain and Boulevard Saint-Michel. And I remember being in Jardin de Luxembourg reading Whitman's Leaves of Grass, that beautiful time in May. So without further ado, I'll read La Parisienne. In an attic room long ago, beneath the moth-eaten parasol of a Parisian night sky, he burned the manuscript slowly, page by page, to keep her warm, but she cried. In the morning, she stirred the ashes of his soul to flame, and he burned for her again. He remembered the time she pierced her ears, and he hung jewels in the wound. They talked beneath declining suns and kissed beneath imperfect moon. In the evening, they had bread, cheese, and Beaujolais. At morning, croissant et du café au lait, s'il vous plaît. While he was reading Whitman's Leaves of Grass, she was simply hoping that their love would last. So the next poem is about Alzheimer's, and it's called Goodbye. It was winter when I saw the desolation of your soul, as I looked into the vast vacuity of your eyes. Then walking home in sifted snow, beneath the white plumage of leafless trees, blurred in a tearing sky, I whispered in a foggy breeze, goodbye. I wondered if your time was a tide of eternity, and why the vault of memory was sealed. In my reverie I stumbled on a dead thrush, frozen hard as stone and all its music hushed. Then I crossed a bridge into the sun, and with a numbing heart I sauntered on. This next poem, let me change the mood significantly here. It's called Silk Stockings. Today I place upon my noble head a cap of black as I pass judgment on Alan Gant, that he should be taken to the place from whence he came until he recant, so we can go back to the sensual elegance of a woman rolling off her stockings, and to watch her roll them on again. That is the paradise lost which we must regain. Mary Quant gave us the miniskirt, and we couldn't help but flirt with those long-legged Brigitte Bardots, till he came up with pantyhose. It's hard to imagine a femme fatale wiggle into those. I suppose there are women who think it unseemly that one should write something so steamy. I'm sure the vanguard of women's lib will find it somewhat glib that men would rather women wore stockings. They will whine about being objectified, but this nonsense must be rectified. I know it may be shocking, perhaps it's just a fetish, but oh my God, what a dish. Just give him 40 lashes before you string him up. That will teach the vulgar pup, who ruined the joy of many, not to despise the style of his sexy granny. Anyway, this is called Navigation. My great-grandfather was a seafaring captain, and this is about the search for where he was buried. It's called Navigation. Navigating the unknown led me to a lichen-speckled headstone, slanting in the uneven earth. Corroded with acid rains, I scraped away the scabs, prized the ivy fingers from their tenacious grip, and traced his name with trembling fingers on the frozen stone, his blood running through my veins, etched in flesh and bone. A seafaring captain, I wondered about the longitude and latitude of his life. I see the same moon as he when he voyaged on the sea, the same North Star and celestial canopy. What storms had he survived? Waves rising from the deep, leviathans with ravening jaws. What stories he might have told, trawled from that unfathomable reservoir. What shores had he seen, with their lacy hems of foam, lifting in the tantalizing breeze? Now all his tempests ceased, his anchor cast, his home at last. I want to read two short poems now about, um, inspired by memories of my father. And I have different kinds of memories about my dad. Some when I was very young, very close association and great friendship. And then there was a darker side as well. And um, I loved him then, I love him still. But the poems will tell you something about that. This is called The Conch Shell. Walking on a foreign shore, I find a conch shell and remember my small hand in yours, the day you told me to hold it to my ear. At your prompting, I heard the ocean's rhythm, marveling at the mysterious magic in my hand, as I paddled in the warm sea of your love and strolled along the hem of sand, skirting the coast where my mother stood. Then one day I clasped cupped hands to my ears when you shouted at her. Your voice crashed like breakers on the rocks in the acoustic ocean of my tumultuous thoughts. Her tears warm and salty as the sea on my lips when I kissed her. Your words reverberating through the years, where you still resonate in the cavity of my heart. And this one now is called Remembering Dad. Sitting in the cleft of sandstone by the turquoise sea, my eyes fixed upon the page of poetry, when I was distracted by the seductive interplay of wind and waves beyond the jasmine sea pools at my feet, I saw him walking barefoot in the distance, growing smaller as he moved along the beach, transfusing his soul in solitude and silence as he always did. The weight of 60 winters slowed his pace, but he wore the joy of 60 summers on his face. When he was young, he knew the morning sun of gladness, and as he grew old, he watched the setting sun with sadness. I watched him under the seagull-speckled sapphire sky. I wanted to go to him and say, I love you, Dad. I didn't, and I don't know why. Maybe it was because we were men, we didn't say such things back then. So, do I have time for one more, or should I leave it there now?
Do one more.
Okay. I'll do this shorter poem called Fisherman. I listened to the cascade of silver sound beside the river rocks where someone clad in waders is fishing, still and patient as a heron. With the flick of a wrist, the line whips in graceful arches till it dips and flops amongst the swarming mayfly close to those Piscean lips. There is a rhythm to his action, like a chariot driver with a lash raised above his head, urging stallions to go faster as they gallop on the water's edge. Oblivious to time as tide rises to his hips, he paints the parchment of sky in swift strokes like an Islamic scribe in Cufic script. The calligraphy of an ancient spell is cast. Something took his bait at last. The rod bends, the line tightens. He pulls a rainbow from the circle of expanding ripples, then suddenly it snaps with a splash. He reels in his pride, perhaps with a silent vow, to return and claim the elusive prize another time. But for now, that lucky trout is free to swim and maybe even tell the tale of all that happened to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kieran. That was lovely. Great stuff. Okay, we're going to move on and we're going to go from Limerick across the Irish Sea to Newcastle upon Tyne and the second of our Revival Press poets, Keith Armstrong. Keith has worked as a community worker, poet, librarian and publisher. He is coordinator of the Northern Voices Community Project's creative writing and community publishing enterprise. His poetry has been extensively published in magazines such as New Statesman and Poetry Review, as well as in collections Splinters and The Month of the Asparagus. He has also been broadcast on radio and TV. He has performed his poetry throughout Britain and abroad and is a regular visitor to Limerick. A collection of his poetry, an anthology of poetry, should I say, Two Rivers Meet, was published by Revival Press in 2008. And that was a collection of poets from Newcastle, including Keith, and the White House poets. So I'm going to hand over to Keith now and he can start his reading.
Okay, thanks, Dominic. You hear me?
Yes, gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. I'll read a couple of poems from the Revival anthology, which was a product of a long-term now cultural exchange between Limerick and Newcastle. And first one I'd like to read is dedicated to my mother, and who was very fond of feeding the birds in the back garden. And it's the place where she lived was Whitley Bay, not far from Newcastle. She's out feeding the birds on the dot again, in the drizzle of a seaside morning, the seed cast from her hand to the jerking beak of a cock pheasant. She's alone in a flock of dark starlings, scattering crumbs to make them shriek. She's a friend of Spuggy's, gives blackbirds water, Her eyes fly across the garden to catch a quick robin, to spot a wee wren, to chase a bold magpie. She is innocence. She is a lovely old lady, still giving, still nursing. She deserves heaven. She deserves a beautiful nest to dream out her last hours in birdsong, in the rich colours of sunset. She is my mother. She is a rare bird who fed me beautiful dreams. Thank you for letting me climb with the skylarks. Thank you for the strength of wings. I think now I'll read a poem actually about my father, who was for many years a shipyard worker on Tyneside. And remember when I was younger, he came back from work with splinters of metal in his fingernails and used a pin to scrape out the splinters from under his fingernails. So I called the poem Splinters. Yeah, this is a poem for my father, and it's called Splinters. You picked splinters with a pin each day from under blackened fingernails, shreds of metal from the shipyard grime, minute memories of days swept by, the dusty remnants of a life spent in the shadow of the sea, the tears in your shattered eyes at the end of work. And your hands were strong, so sensitive and capable of building boats and nursing roses, a kind and gentle man who never hurt a soul, the sort of quiet, knackered man who built a nation. Dad, I watched your ashes float away down to the ocean bed, and in each splinter I saw your caring eyes and gracious smile. I think of your strong silence every day, and I am full of you. The waves you scaled and all the sleeping Tyneside streets you taught me to dance my fleeting feet along. When I fly, you're with me. I see your fine face in sun-kissed clouds and in the gold ring on my finger, and in the heaving crowd on Saturday, and in the lung of Granger Market, and in the ancient breath of our own Newcastle. Still there, Dominic?
Yeah, we're still here. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay.
Keep going.
That's a couple of poems from the Revival anthology. Obviously, I have been to Limerick more times now than I can seriously remember. And I'll just read this particular poem. Yeah, it's mostly when we travel from Newcastle, we fly into Dublin, take a train across Ireland to Limerick, and normally speaking, we change at Limerick Junction. And this is called We Change at Limerick Junction. We change at Limerick Junction. Rain knocks the smiles off our faces, the sun glows and exposes the dust and the faint traces of our poems. We change at Limerick Junction. Weather makes our eyes fade, the hours grow tired of breathing in the pain of the world. We change at Limerick Junction. Hearts thunder along the crazy rails, the weight of our feet lands with a thump on the daily platform. We change at Limerick Junction. Carry gifts for old friends, the urge to go on trailing poetry along the lines. We change at Limerick Junction. Girls get too young for us. The flesh weakens with the passage of whiskey. We change at Limerick Junction. Air races in the manes of horses. The money drains from our exhausted pockets. We change at Limerick Junction. Jump from one train to another, the inexhaustible desire to write a better verse. We change at Limerick Junction. Words are why we laugh. Beauty is what makes us want to live. We change at Limerick Junction. So I was determined to put Limerick Junction on the world map. And yeah, maybe a couple more poems. I've been thinking all day what to write and what to perform, and then I've completely changed my mind. So this is one that's called In a Palace Bar Afternoon. I know there are problems with pubs in Ireland at present, somewhat similar in Newcastle. And it's dedicated to a few sessions that I had in the Palace Bar, and goes something like this. Dead conversations and dud checks litter the gaps between the gawping portraits in this literary back room. Here in the afternoon of Irish culture, I hear the creak of Kavanagh's knees going down the steep bog stairs, pissing words away, holding another conversation in his clumsy hands. So what's a poetry boy to do? Sozzle through another day, dance between the lines of pints of plain, wallow in the crevices of Beckett's genius, creep around the palace floor, scraping for scraps of dead oral histories. For today, I'll put away my pen, worn out with trying to trap the city of Limerick in groping poems. I'll sit back and crack with Duffy, Lonsdale and the lads. Let Bertie, Smiley's barking patter wash over my weariness. Leave it to the Shawleys, to the huddled snug, to set things right. I'm flying without a passport today. Buzzing along with Jimmy Joyce on board, this Ryanair Ulysses jet at swim to bards. And what's the point of lies in ink when real poetry should make a woman come with the touch of birdsong on the lips of this hour? Give your tongues a break, Bean and Houlihan and the rest were dust on a spin of Guinness. And yet, the twinkle of light through the old smoke of patter does make the breath in the lungs of a Dublin dancing day as worthwhile as the sweeping kiss of that girl's wings stroking the mouth of the Liffey. Thanks. Yeah. I think I might finish on that. Would that be okay? Is that
that's fine? That's fine,
yeah?
Keith. Okay, well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thanks very much. It seemed like a good ending.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a million, Keith. Again,
Yes.
your usual great stuff. Now we're going to go from Newcastle all over into or over to Central Europe, I suppose, Madrid, and invite John Liddy to read. John is a Limerick poet. He resides in Madrid, and he's the founding editor, along with Jim Burke, of the literary magazine The Stony Thursday Book. And he's published 10 collections of poetry in English. And tonight he's going to read from his forthcoming collection from Revival Press, Arias of Consolation, which is a book-length poem, and it's an eclectic trip from the poet's perspective around Limerick. So I'd like to invite John to get going.
Okay, Dom. Thank you. This is the eighth part of a long poem called Arias of Consolation. One day I will go to Ardnacrusha to appraise Sean Keating's paintings in the flesh, admire again the swans by the falls in Doon and Ass, the details in Lilburn's and O'Neill's map, Torcore townhouse from the 1450s, the Illan Lanchelen from the Windy Gap. Go back to Sarsfield's Rock near St. Bridget's Church in Temple Braden and walk with Tom O'Grady without constraint through gaps in the hawthorns and talk of old beliefs discarded by science, the role of gods in the bought and sold of the modern world. Back for some more of the wherewithal from Mary Hanley and Nora McNamara, who helped me scale a boundary wall. Back to where I once held soft hands on summer walks with those who will always be young. Back to the Badlands where I fell with my cross on my knees, as though in prayer, a dejected heart scald rising to face his woe, no longer ill at ease. Back for an earful of local anecdote to soften our cough for fear of losing the run of ourselves. back for the fur coat and no knickers on the bus into town, from a gas card, not the full shilling, but no dog either, always on her Gary own, for having been a while in the long grass and out of practice with the Ludine beside a Mia who was in a bad fuss. Molly foostered and kicked in the thaws, Maria, all that cat's malachy, dog's tobacco for a lusher's cause, who tells me he has a gee in his backyard and other paraphernalia in a shed behind the pad, an nincompoop only too happy to drip dry me with more spoof, no sooner carved than licked, a man on his picky with notions galore. Back to the Ownshuk with a bee in her bonnet and rent-paying flies in the bedsit, who knows all about paddy power and orange juice, electricity palpable between us, a jab of a nuke, enough said, the bee's knees, sensitivities incompatible. Back with a piper's welcome on the pig's back for the placura, accosted on a thoroughfare by the plucker inn, selling ladies' items for interested Sheilas, a sheep's eye on skirt that passes brightly by, an old Scotia, a sham who piss takes, Sean Hannigan, who'd shaft you as quick as a Shawneen, a Sleeveen who slinges past the Shidog, always on the take, a Scooraloo for a sidekick, a smother of hair on his smig, a cat's lick upstairs, a smush smollicking for hard tack on a side door, without 2 pennies to rub together, a gander at a galoot who suggested breeding 2 gondolas on the river. Back to where Chew said, find a man and a woman who have forgotten words so that I can talk to them, where I can enjoy a grander sight, said a poet of the Tang dynasty, if I climb to a greater height, where I would still find time, inferred Luther King, to plant an apple tree if the world fell out of rhyme, where not even God can tell how another man's shoe is hurting him, to where the flimsiest willow binds the toughest wood, a delicate colt becomes a competent horse, where a hungry castle is a deficit, and sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, but talk not fill the stomach, where a silk purse is not a sow's ear, a ploughed field never done by thinking, the hen involved, but the pig committed, its tail integral to the whole, the hide its value, the old man gone out to the donkey's home, idle as a piper's little finger, fit to be tied with an urge to hit out on the name of the father at a fly-by-night, weak as a gosling, but as boastful as a shop cat, with not as much as an amen in him, to where anything with the tongue can be done, knowledge no burden, talk put in a bottle by the young, who'd make a nest in your ear as quick as they'd look at you, but no clue about a lax weir or a white boat or men with 2 feet on the loft, or where I'll get the O'Kelly welcome anew. To where too much haste slows things down, a swallow not make a summer, whoever breaks pays a knife, not cut its own handle, or knowledge not trouble until trouble troubles you, the test of the anvil with a spit, where thoughts behind a gift are what matter, to where I can slice the wind. I go back to find all is set to change again, back to a new beginning, a familiarity of recognizable range, a subtle vicissitude, back to never going back, because you are always in me, your arias of consolation furrowing in my vein, your sights and sounds, my gway ira, a windbag in the bewitching hour of put-downs and uplifts pertaining to birthright, makushla mega-megging my sleep, persistent as tide and uplight, to write you for the oncoming fold, out of my spleen, where your fable will forever continue to be told, by a child straddling a Sheila wee outside the castle, a walk to Gilog, across the Black Bridge, along Classy, and off the main drag for a spree with a wise old quail, a cut of a lumper modelled in bronze on Steamboat Quay, taradiddles of Gurky, Lanty on the run, explaining to his famished friends 'twas the eel that ate the rashers in the pan, a medium for the nixer and the tangler, nothing for the thorny wire with no spondulix. Others on the tubber, whatever you're having yourself, a Vic, says Gabriel, connoisseur of tawny, who once returned a tap to a smart Alec. Back to fearless days without the near invisible corrupting a handshake, a cough on a bus, a sign of a phantom war. Good times without the pounding of heavy artillery heard from Plitvich's nature reserve. Peacetime and a striding beauty in summer without a care, bright-eyed as the dazzling water gathers in its threads, conjures a cape like a cumulus cloud. Feach na limnica, look at the coats, I hear her cry, as she points at the window display of Holman Lee-like models, the perfumed air adrift along the street, where I am in awe of all that you were, are, will be, ethos, heritage, integrity, complete. And to finish, a little ballad I wrote for Jerry O'Brien, Yeshte go raibh anam dilish. Around the bend. At last, the day of my dream arrived, to reach Clonmacnoise by water, like Turgus in the Viking in 844, who caused untold slaughter. But that, of course, was not my plan, for the offer to make the journey came many years ago from my good friend Captain Jerry. So off we set one summer's morn, full of joyous trepidation, as we cruised up the Shannon, relishing in every detail, cows along the river banks, lapping up rays of sunlight, mallard ducks amongst the reeds, readying themselves for flight. Then I was told to keep an eye out, for the ruins lay round the bend, but hard as I looked, I saw no sign of ruins I prayed to comprehend. 3 hours later, in Ballinasloe is where we ended up. The cruiser without petrol lay drifting on the suck. That night in Gary Kennedy, after pints to beat the band, I closed my eyes and heard a voice. 'Tis just around the bend. Thank you very much, and happy Culture Night, Limerick. And
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And looking forward to publishing John's book, COVID permitting, before Christmas. And I think it's going to be something really special for Limerick as well. Okay, and we're going to move on now, this time across the Atlantic and over to Charleston in the USA. And the revival press poet Eugene Platt, who was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1939. His poems have appeared in many literary publications, and some have been choreographed. He has given over 100 public readings of his work and was invited to read at the inaugural Dublin Arts Festival in 1970. He was the first poet laureate of the town of James Island and was the poet in residence for public radio station WSCI. He lives in Charleston with his main muse, Montreal-born wife Judith, Corgi Henry, and Kat Keats. His recent collection, Nuda Veritas, was published by Revival Press last month. So, Eugene, please take it away.
Thank you, Dominic, for having me on this wonderful program. And thank you and Revival Press for producing this beautiful book. Thanks too to Michael Farry for critiquing the manuscript before you sent it to press. I'll read 5 poems, beginning with the final poem in the collection, which is titled, Thank You Note to My New Wife's Late Husband.
It changes from week to week. Certain things now are open, like actually.
Thank you note to my new wife's late husband. My dear Frank, you dutiful deceased mate of the most delightful wife any man has ever widowed. Frankly speaking, as long as I breathe, I'd be an ingrate not to thank you posthumously, profusely, repeatedly for the expensive pair of exquisite gloves you wore that final year of your COPD shortened life. By exquisite, I mean full grain leather, 100% cashmere lining, made in Italy. Naturally, you favored the kind of furnishings one would expect of an accomplished architect. Heck, growing up as a poor boy on Orleans Road, my food stamp family could never afford such luxury. And convolutedly, I'd be remiss not to thank you too for leaving me, even if unwillingly, your supple spouse, a woman who fits me like your gloves, snug and warm, and as furry as Keats or Kitten. By dying, you let us chance an unlikely romance. It could be called The Princess and the Pauper. I close with the hope there's an Irish pub somewhere on the other side of this full of irony life that will meet inside, handshake or hug, and stand each other to endless rounds of pints, while the women we will have shared terrestrially hovers between us, sipping salty margaritas forever. Postscript, God bless the grapevine of gossip. Today the tribute circulated back to me after he swore in secret to a bosom buddy that I, who never wore camel hair coat or exquisite gloves, was nonetheless in bed the best, even if my hands were never as warm as my heart. And from there, I'll read After Inniskeen, a poem after I wrote during my year at Trinity College, when on an April afternoon, my wife, little girl, and my mother, who was visiting, we made a pilgrimage to Inniskeen, where I could pay homage to someone, in my opinion, is one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. It's dedicated to Brendan Kennelly, who led me to discover the work of Patrick Kavanagh. After Inniskeen, semi-hypnotized by windshield wipers, ceaseless semicircles. My eyes follow an April showered roadway winding south of Inniskeen, where I've just been to pay homage to Patrick Kavanagh and found my father there. No, not in body, but in the spirit of a loved one remembered at the grave of another. And as Inniskeen falls behind, I see it in the rearview mirror of my mind, remaining as it has been for decades. Green fields and gentle hills, fully fertile for poetry often lived, yet rarely written. Inniskeen falls behind as Dublin comes nearer, and as the sky becomes clearer over the same road the late blooming bard traveled in search, not of escape from his great hunger, but of its fulfillment. I pray for him who walked apart on the hills, loving life's miracles, a grateful token silently spoken for helping me discover the poetry of his unknown contemporary, my own father Paul, who perhaps unlike Patrick, never forgot that print on paper doesn't matter. What is not in books, but on leaves of life in sweat and tears. Now I, with more than much to learn, try to exhume his unwritten lines. Paul should be published vicariously, while Patrick's repute remains unchallenged, his plowman philosophy revindicated. In spring of this seminal year, Paul and Patrick are silent. Again, the days become longer. A leaf floats beneath Bagot Street Bridge on a greater journey than I have ever dreamed. It does not care. A regal swan on the River Shannon.
Yeah, I got him.
Here at the head of a statuary, according to the whim of the moon, the storied River Shannon flows fast or slow past the namesake castle of King John the Loon. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. Many, mostly Irish, have died here, but wounds have been bound, the dead have been buried, and probably a peace was found. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. Otherwise, obscure King John is remembered in legend as the nemesis of Robin Hood, an honorable outlaw who robbed only the rich to help the poor as well as he could. Many have died here in ages past. The sieges are over at last. To see the castle seized by the proud natives, surely Robin Hood would have gloated, while surly King John raged and ranted. Sadly, that bad king's ego was royally bloated. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. The Danes, the Normans, the English who came to conquer are gone. Today, the invaders are mostly tourists, mainly Americans, each armed with a smartphone. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. On an uncommonly hot day in July, I lie on a grassy slope on the other side of the River Shannon, my heart filled with love and hope. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. Before I cross the bridge to join the assault, a real swan glides by in front of me, as if in memory of the fallen. Such serenity, such tranquility. Although many have died here in ages past, the sieges are over at last. And I'll finish with two very short poems that were inspired by my daughter. The first, which is titled New Life, on the day that she was born, which happened to be an Easter Sunday, half a century ago. And the next poem, which is titled New Priorities, is just on one of many occasions when I went to check on her as she slept in her crib. New Life. Gurgling at your fountain of youth, close to the heart whose beat was once your own, even your coos speak the contentment of a new life impured only by the sins of your fathers. But you bring hope even to them, dear daughter, and yours is like a second coming. And finally, I'll read New Priorities. My preoccupation is no longer empires. I tiptoe in darkness to witness your blankets rise and fall. Then, bending over the slats of your crib that remain silent centuries through the night, I become reacquainted with a God I knew in my youth and say a wordless prayer of hope for your future, which is the future of all the world, while listening for the sweetest sound I have ever heard, your breathing.
Thank you very much, Eugene. That was great. Excellent. Well done. Okay, that brings us to the formal readers, the end of the formal reading. And we've got a few minutes left. I'm just going to throw it open to the participants. If there's anybody out there who might want to read one poem before we finish, they're quite welcome to. If they just raise their hand, let me know, and we can unmute them. And I see Matt wants to read a poem. Anybody else? Ger, lovely. Okay. Jim, well done for turning up. I'll see if we can get you all in, right? Okay, how many you want to? Okay, we have Ger, we have Matt, we have Jim, and we have John. Okay, that's 4 so far, and Anthony, right? We won't go any farther than that because we haven't got that much time. Okay, so I'm going to unmute Matt. Matt, can you unmute yours?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
here I am. Right.
Yeah, work away, so Matt.
Right, so my poem is from the Singing Woods, and what I've chosen is the poem Orbits. This was written in what we call lovingly, the cow's lawn in the stall, the town park. Father of a boy and girl, busy in the playground down in the town park, launching them high up on the swings for a fling. Then on a suspended tire, a seat for his little queen on her own aeroplane. Allows lad and lass ad lib, move on to further thrills, over on a merry-go-round, which he sends spinning with one flick of his wrist. Children in orbit under him, in practice runs for later on, when the time for takeoff, for following their dreams, intervenes between them as they go on wider orbits. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much. And we'll go over to Ger Duffy.
I'd like to read a poem written by a Sudanese poet called Abdel Wahab Yusuf. In the last week, he was one of 45 people drowned in the Mediterranean when their ship was shot at and caught fire. You will die at sea, your head rocked by the roaring waves, your body swaying in the water like a perforated boat. In the prime of youth you'll go, shy of your 30th birthday. Departing early is not a bad idea, but it surely is if you die alone, with no woman calling you to her embrace. Let me hold you to my breast. I have plenty of room. Let me wash the dirt of misery off your soul. Thank you.
Thanks, Ger. Lovely stuff. And we'll go over to John McGrath.
Good evening, everybody. My father liked to drink. My father liked to drink, most of the time in moderation, but on the odd occasion, christenings, weddings, funerals, fair days if the bullocks made a decent price or didn't, he'd been known to overdo it. Not that it made him happy. The opposite, if truth be told. Maudlin and melancholy, soft and sentimental, rambling on about how much he loved us and to take care of Mammy after he passed away. Never a raised voice, mind, never an angry word, a gentle drunk, soft in the head and soft in the tongue, unless we laughed at him for propping up the whitewashed cowhouse wall, or clinging to the door, not daring to let go. Imagine then a little boy of 9 or 10 passing a bar one afternoon, a wedding in full swing, when the doors burst open and 4 men staggered out, clutching a 5th that bawled and roared and looked just like my father. The tables were set out the night before, they said, a bottle on each one, and at the toast they drained their brimming glasses. My father's was the one poured from the top, where toxins gather, his first drink of the day, so he was poisoned, they told us, not drunk, and we believed them. The man that poured had been a pioneer, teetotaler. He didn't know that you should always shake a bottle when it's new, a lesson learned for life. Down the years, I've been inclined to doubt, at least to wonder, was it true, or whether we, his children, had been spared the truth. But for myself, I take no chances with each new bottle that I open, and there have been a few. I shared a drink last Christmas at my sister's place, watched her take the pristine powers from the press and turn it over twice. And as we raised a glass to generations past and yet to come, I heard my father's voice. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Lovely stuff. Okay, Jim Burke. You there, Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. The poem with a happy title anyway. It's called Happy Days in These Strange Times. So it's a prose poem. Bare-ass trees against the skyline, spooky as dawn. They are waiting, knowing something's coming, rising. And I'm listening to the American actor John Hamm reciting Frank O'Hara's poem, Mayakovsky. All across the sky there is light. I was 5 years old in 1959. I had beaten pneumonia. My younger brother Doug would be born in a year, and in another 5, my grandfather would be dead. Frank O'Hara died when he was 40 years old. I'd beaten pneumonia once, and I've been lucky to beat it twice. Me and Doug were strong as rocks. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, staring into the light. Frank O'Hara sparked breaths of fresh air, and in the freshness asked twice, what does he think of that? What do I think of that? And all the time I'm thinking, Doug and me, we're strong as rocks.
Thanks, Jim. Lovely stuff. Good to hear from you. Okay, we're going to go to Anthony. Is Anthony there?
I didn't prepare anything, but I will read a poem from a nurse in May, Rebecca Elliott. This was from May, and at the height of the pandemic. If nobody minds being reminded of the current situation any more than they already are, I'll move on with the poem.
Okay, work away.
Thank you. Thank you. It's 7 a.m. and as I put on my scrubs, I worry about lives, yet some worry about pubs. Will they reopen or will they stay closed? I fight on the front line, no doubt I'm exposed to a monster so deadly like a sniper at war, killing thousands a day, it's hard to ignore. We put on our armor to look after our patients, fighting for breath, no exaggeration. I hold your granny's hand, her lips turning blue, as she looks up into my face, mask my goggles and an FFP2. Her life has come to an end, it's the last breath she's taken, COVID the cause of a sleep to which she will never awaken. Over the phone I tell her daughter, Mam's life has come to an end. I have time to plan a funeral, to which only 10 can attend. A tickle in my throat, a pain in my head. 3 weeks later, I'm confined to my bed. My phone lights up, ringing and ringing. A stranger's voice on the line. Is this Miss Elliott? Yes, speaking. I was given the news, somewhat unexpected. The swab result came back with COVID detected. Now my family must distance at least 2 meters away. So to keep them all safe, locked in room I must stay. But I am not the first and I won't be the last. But one thing is for sure, I will kick COVID's ass.
Thanks, Anthony. On that note, we will bring the event to an end. I'd like to thank our invited guest readers, John, Liddy, Keith Armstrong, Kieran Beville, and Eugene Platt, and to everybody else who joined in, and to the participants who tuned in. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll do something again in the future. So from Limerick and Culture Night, I'd like to say good night to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, no problem. Bye.
Night, Dominic. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.